Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Susan, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm so happy to be speaking with you today. You are a professional in this field of conflict resolution and so much more. But before we get to what you're up to right now, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Oh gosh. So the very first job that I had one of those dads who was fine with us not working right up until our 16th birthday. And then literally on my 16th birthday, my dad said, "You can drive, you can get a job." So I went and got a waitressing job at the local Bill Knapp's in Michigan. And so my very first job was waitressing, which I look back on now is a really wonderful way to start my work life because it taught me so many things that have carried through now to 40 plus years later. So it was a great first job.
Yeah, absolutely. Those sorts of jobs where working with the public, hungry people. There's so much that's going on. It's fast paced. So what are some of those lessons that you learned or experiences you had that have kind of carried with you?
Well, you highlighted a couple of them, right? Working with people and hungry people. Hungry people are hangry people sometimes, right? So you're
Right.
dealing with personalities, people who want their food when their food doesn't come correctly.
Mhm.
Even though you didn't cook it, you're just carrying it over to them. You had to learn how to deal with that, which as a 16-year-old, was a little bit of a new experience for me. You also had to learn to be very responsible. You had to learn right away that showing up on time because other people were relying on you. You learned that the job wasn't just bringing food to people. There was all the rest of it, learning how to make small talk with people, connect with people, things that we still do today, right? Some of the most important aspects in mediation, which is what I do, is creating trust and rapport with the participants. Well, same thing when you walk up to the table and say, "Hi, my name is Susan, and I'm going to be your server today." So all of those little things that you learn and going the extra mile, learning that it's not just bringing the food out, but it's coming back, checking on how everybody's doing at the table, putting that little extra something on a plate or stopping or doing a little something extra for them if it's a special day or a celebration. So it was a really great, I ended up waitressing and bartending all the way through law school. So it was the job I stuck with. And I will say one last thing. I told my stepkids this. It's a great job because tips, you walk out, at least back in the old days, you walked out with cash in your pocket, which was really nice. So these days with credit cards and Venmo payments, I don't know that you actually get cash in the same way, but tips were great.
Yeah, and we do have this really sort of interesting tip culture where you just tip for everything, or the baseline is 20% or whatever it might be. But it is something that you learn really quickly that your your how much you get is based on your performance. And we are such creatures of habit that people will keep on going to the same spot, the same coffee shop, the same restaurant. And with restaurants, they will request you if they have a rapport with you. And then you can upsell them, which then also has to do with the tip and building these sort of network relationships. And as we know that in the world of business and community, it's all about networking. The quality of our life has to do with the quality of our relationships, and there's so much that is tied into those first jobs, or just those jobs of serve in the service industry.
Yeah, you use that word relationships. Networking is relationships. And I love that because so many people see networking as a transactional type of relationship. And that's not at all what it is. It's really about building those relationships. And so you're right. From that very first job that I had, I was learning that importance and the direct connection to success in however you may define that. That's one of the things I always talk about is, success isn't just financial, but it definitely helped when you were a 16-year-old. That was one of them, and yeah, you learn that building those relationships, people that will come back and ask for you or take the extra 2 minutes to write out a little card, or these days give you a Google review or whatever those things are, that's really how you grow a successful business and you become successful in your business.
So I imagine, the 16-year-old it sounds like you're showing up ready to work, interested, but not everybody has that same sort of vision of going the extra mile or that it's my problem or that, I am just here to give you your food. I'm not here to build relationships. And all the time that you spend in the industry, you find people showing up to work, colleagues and bosses in different sorts of places. So why do you think you started with the service mentality of everything that you were talking about really investing in and showing up in this really professional capacity, even as a young person?
I think it's such a good question because I think we all have some inherent traits in ourselves that when you're 16 years old, right, you don't even really know what those are. And especially for your first job, I think I was lucky to fall into a service industry job. It really was, I went to the classifieds and looked for who was hiring. And this was I think the first ones. It also happened to be the restaurant was right across the street from my high school. So it was very convenient. I could walk there after school. But that was a lot of luck for me because it did play into what I have found now, again, 40 years later, to be my strengths. And I have always stayed in service type industries throughout. It's one of the reasons why I ended up going to law school because I realized that I liked working with people. I wanted to help people. And it's interesting because when I went to law school, I thought I was going to go into business law. In fact, my first job right out of law school was on Wall Street. And I thought, I'd made it. Here I am walking out of law school. I'm working on Wall Street. And the very last thing it was dealing with people. I was literally sitting at a cubicle with, contracts like this, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And that was my job, was going through those things. And I lasted 9 months in that job before I quit. I hated every minute of it. It was not me. And I went from that to being a divorce attorney, a family law attorney. And again, because that's where I could make relationships with people, feel like I was helping one-on-one with clients, helping them and their families in difficult situations, in difficult times. And that's what had drawn me to the law. I think we are lucky when we find, especially at such a young age, something that resonates with us, even though I don't know that it really resonated with me to the point that I understood it. I also, did enjoy finding a way to make enough money to support me in a variety of different ways, both through high school, then undergrad, then law school. So there was that monetary component, which was also a driver to it. And that's what drove me to Wall Street. And it was a really good lesson for me. The reason I mentioned that was I ended up making less in my first law firm job as a divorce family attorney than I was making in that very first Wall Street job that I quit. But I was so much happier.
Mhm.
And it was a great additional lesson for me that being happy in what you're doing, feeling satisfied in what you're doing, having those other needs met are part of success, not just that financial component.
Yeah, that's really such a good point. And, when we think about what motivates people and what they want out of a job, and most of us, of course, want to be gainfully employed, we want to pay our bills. But what success financially means is so different, right? Because different people have different kinds of needs. They come from different sorts of backgrounds. What enough or what the goal is financially is one thing. And then what kind of family we want to have, how much we want to be invested in our work or our civic It's all so different. And the more that we know ourselves, right, that you've known all along that you are service oriented. And so, and also that you want to be gainfully employed, right? That you have this driver as making money. So when you find this job that says, oh, I'm going to make money, but it's only part of the equation, right? That the ideal job is one that we make money at and it's not either or. So finding that sweet spot where we can make them enough money, whatever that means to us, and also be personally satisfied.
Yeah, it's a big component. These days, I work with a lot of clients who are in that career transition phase. Mostly for me, it's helping lawyers, litigators transition into mediators, arbitrators into the dispute resolution world. But one of the first conversations I have with them is, what does success mean in this new career? What would that look like for you? Because everyone presumes, and it's always a component, is that you have to make enough money. But enough money in that career is different for every single person. And much more often, the priorities are other things. All
Yeah.
those things you mentioned, family, having time. For many practitioners, it's a later career for them. So some of them are looking to fulfill a need they didn't have fulfilled in their earlier career. So it's really an important conversation, and one that, because they've been in a field for so long, most of them, they've not had with themselves in a very long time. They've just done what they do, and they've been doing it, most of them, for decades. And then suddenly I come along and I'm like, well, what does it look like to be successful? And their heads explode a little bit because no one's ever asked them, or they've never thought about it. So it's one of our most interesting first conversations.
Right, because we're adults, we nose to the grindstone. You have prepared yourself for a particular field. You have invested greatly, whether through education, experience, or both. And now you're building your networks and all your how people see you as being competent. And it's like, well, what else is there? So why even consider what else is there? Because I have these obligations financially and to my community of wherever I'm a practitioner to, right? And so I've invested in this world. And yet, of course, a lot of times in midlife and in other places, we see that maybe there is something else. And so really having that question of what is the good life for me? And is it the same when I was 20 that, I'm living out this ideal? And for some people it is. My husband has been a professor ever since he graduated, and that is exactly what he wants to do for the rest of his life, right? And so some people find that lane, and others go through a variety of transitions.
Yeah, that's been me. I went through, obviously the very first job out of law school didn't last for long. And then I stayed in that family law arena for a number of years. But honestly, although it met some of the needs for me, I wanted to be helping people. I wanted to have that one-on-one contact to build relationships with clients, to help them forge forward. It didn't take that long for me to realize that litigation is something of a mismatch with families that are trying to restructure through a difficult process like divorce. But all those things that you were talking about right there, right? It was, now I was invested in this career path for 15 years or so. I was good at it. There was a certain, ego boost, I guess, to that, or it feeds a certain something in you. I was well compensated for the work because I was good at it. And it's what I'd always done now for 15 years. So, how did I even start contemplating what else I might do? And it really, for me, I transitioned finally to being a mediator, which helped. But it wasn't until I started moving around the country, my husband's job started taking us to new places where I may not, we first moved to California. You have to take the bar exam again there, all kinds of fun with that. Um, and, I started needing to find other things to fill my time while I was getting my credentials and everything pulled together. Then, as soon as I got licensed in California, we moved to Chicago, where I would have had to go through the licensure thing all over again. And was like, no way, I just did that. So I started to face a reality of needing to find other ways to have a career, connect, do all of the things that fulfill me. And that's really when the fun started. right? That's when I really got to move away from those tethers almost that you
Mhm.
mentioned of this is what I've always done.
So how did you find mediation? Of course, being a divorce lawyer, I would imagine, mediation was a part of your world. You used mediators before you transitioned to doing that full time, among other things that you do. So why, I mean, mediation is absolutely wonderful, but why did you land there?
Well, it's interesting because you say I probably knew about mediation, and I am sad to say no.
Hmm.
Back when I went to law school, it was not an offer. There was no ADR program at my law school. If mediation was offered, I did not take it. And the way I experienced mediation in my 20 plus years as a family law attorney in Connecticut was sort of a when you go to court, they send you down to an office to go try and work it out before you're allowed to have a hearing. And they called that mediation. That's not really what mediation is. And so I wish I had known. I wish that there had been more understanding. And I think in the world we live in today, there is. Certainly, the pandemic opened many people's eyes to the pathways of dispute resolution because the courts were closed. So people needed to find alternative resources for settling their disputes. But for me, it was honestly, I was in court one day having a absolutely horrible day. Not that the hearing wasn't going well, it was, but it was a horrible experience what we had to do in that courtroom to one of the parents of these children that then would have to leave that courthouse and go forward, and that family was going to be irrevocably changed by what was happening in that courtroom that day that I was participatory in. And a colleague sat down next to me and said, it doesn't have to be like this.
Mhm.
And all I knew about her was she had some weird out of court practice, like never went to court. How do you do that? She was a mediator. And she was the mediator that, I ended up wanting to be. And so I always, thank her to this day. She does not remember this conversation, by the way. She saved my life that day, doesn't remember doing it. But that's how I found out. I was in my first 40-hour mediation training about a month later and never
Wow.
looked back.
Wow. A shout out to people just showing up.
Yeah.
When we show up and we look and we are paying attention to the people around us and we tell them about opportunities, we may have no idea how that lands. Or when we say thank you to somebody, or we just really see them, how many times we can think of our own life, we have been changed for the better because somebody did something and they don't remember, but they're just acting in character, right? It's another reason to really act according to your values always.
Yeah, she and I have a lot of interaction today. She's still a wonderful mediator in Connecticut where I used to practice, and we we do a lot of things together. I just saw her. I spoke at their conference recently, and I always tell that story because I do want to do exactly what you just mentioned. I want to encourage people to take that moment. If she had not taken that moment in time to sit down next to me and spend a couple of minutes talking to me, and then when I followed up with her, she spent some time with me, giving me some direction, and then helped me when I was making that transition into being a mediator. It's not as easy. I was a very good litigator. Everyone thinks that means you'll automatically get clients as a mediator. It's not how it works.
Right.
And so she helped me all the way through. And that is a principle of my practice now today, and just who I am as a practitioner is I think it's always very important to take the time to help everyone, and be as generous with what we know and what we can do to help and support others as possible. And honestly, it comes back to you so many times more than
Yeah.
what you give.
It is so wonderful. I love being the age that I'm at. And I just had a call with somebody, and she's a younger person, and working with a nonprofit, and she was interested in what I was doing, but we were talking about business, and she wanted to know a little bit more. I'm like, well, let's meet in a couple of weeks and let's talk about it. And that is so exciting to me to be able to listen to what somebody wants to do and tell them about possibilities that she didn't even know were possible. And I think a lot in this peacemaking space, people don't know about opportunities. They just know they want to make a difference, but it's with so many things we just don't really know about all the different kinds of opportunities that are out there. And so, it's so wonderful to have role models to see, well, what are they doing and how did they get there and how might I imagine my life in these variety of different ways. So for the people who are listening who just don't know much about mediation, um, what is mediation? What is it to you?
To me, mediation is a process that brings people together in an empowering situation. I think of mediation as an empowerment process because it brings people to the table in a way where they're both given the support they need in order to have the difficult conversations they need to have to resolve their issues in the way that works for them, right? And that's such a foreign concept for lawyers. um, because as lawyers, we have that mindset of take the law, take the facts, smush them together to best suit your client's purpose, argue for that, and win. Right? That's the concept there. And really, mediation, although it is law adjacent, because so often it's tied into a dispute that has gotten to the legal process, it's really has very little to do with the law. It really has to do with what's going on between the two people or however many people have an issue and how might we best resolve it for them.
Yeah. I think when people want to be heard, right, their day in court, and we think about justice, right? And so, what is a more evocative than the court system? And yet, there is justice of a certain sort that goes through these official legal channels, right? And so, we've got the law, and we want the law to be just, but it is the law. It is very technical. And what is the right outcome or the best outcome for an individual might be very different than what legal precedent has set, right? And what I think is fair and just might be very different than what the lawyer or the judge sees. And so, this ability to really think through and take ownership of our decisions, because who's living with it, right?
Yeah.
The participants. It's the judge, the lawyer, they're there for the day or however long it lasts. But then the people who are left with the agreement or the outcome, that's the rest of their life, right? So going through a divorce, maybe one day for the judge, and it's the rest of your life, right? A divorce doesn't mean you're done with it. Now you're living with whatever this agreement is, and if there's children and assets and all these sorts of things. And so, what I love about dispute resolution is that I think it's first and foremost about personal empowerment. How can we help people, to take their power back, to be able to really be active participants in their present and in their future so that they can see that it really is up to them to find what's best for them? Because who knows what's best for them, but they do,
But
right?
them, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. No, I love that because that's exactly empowerment is it's such a hard concept, I think, at times for people to understand how that plays into this. But I've spent a lot of time trying to explain to couples who were sitting at my mediation table or these days on my mediation screen that, what matters in their discussions is that the both of them feel able to express themselves and prioritize what's important to each of them and then negotiate something that works as best as possible for both of them. And it doesn't matter what I think as their mediator. I'm an equal at the table, but I'm just there to like whip out my tools to try and help them feel that they are able to have those conversations. So there's a lot of different ways, as we use tools we use to do that. But to give them both the ability to sort of stand on firm ground as they have those discussions. So when they make those decisions, as you said, right, they make decisions that are durable and that they can live with.
Yeah.
And that's the exact opposite of what was happening that day in court that I described,
Mm.
where we were going into a courtroom and really tearing down a parent and basically showing the court that they were not a fit or good parent. And we ended up doing that. And now, what did we do when that family had to go forward? There was
Right.
no positive outcome from that. There were ways to make changes in the future. You can always go back to court and say things have changed. But that family from that day, as I said, was irrevocably changed and it was done in a coercive way.
Yeah.
And that's not what mediation is. The people in a mediation table, they make the agreements.
Right. And I do think that when we're caught in a conflict, it can be so disempowering because we're just caught off guard. Something has happened to us. We're in pain. The other person is the cause of the pain. So what I deal with is workplace conflict is, oh, sorry, workplace conflict is what I do. And so there is all this, I need the other person to act. It's up to them. But, these, principles of principled negotiation helps you see, oh no, I'm an active participant. I can start to figure out, as you said, what is important. But when I'm escalated up here and everything's on fire, it's hard for me to see. And so a mediator using her tools can help that person come down so that they see what's important to them, not what's important to the mediator, but for the individual parties. And then we can, as the mediator, help them reality test, right?
Yes.
And that it is a negotiation. So many times we think in dispute, it's this binary win-lose. I'm going to win because justice is on my side because that other person is a big fat liar and they're a narcissist and whatever else we want to say about them.
You've
And then
been
you
in
go,
my mediation.
or you go in the other room and the person is saying the same thing about the other person. They're sure they're going to win. And it's this, and I understand this, I should win because the other person has harmed me. And there is obviously real harm and pain. But to help people get out of the rumination for a time to start looking forward, well, what do you want your tomorrow to be? We're making this is happening. And so helping people to come down so they can really think about the lay of the land, what they want to have happen this next year, the next 5 years, and making those plans so that when they leave, they've made those plans. And of course, they can be adjusted, as you said, but it's just a very different way of thinking than when we just say, no, the judge is going to, of course, find me right. This is what most people think. And,
I'm just going to quote, oh, you're a hot, oh my God, how did you put up with it for so long?
right. That's
Look
all
at
you
it all.
want. Right. So you got into mediation, but you do more than just mediations. You have a business built on helping other people be successful in this field through your podcast, through your writing, through your advocacy. How did you decide to go into that direction as well?
That really grew out of the fact that I think one of the biggest barriers to entry in the dispute resolution world is what some, sort of a subtle stream of what we've been talking about is so many people come to the practice, but they don't really know how to find success in the practice. They don't really know how to make it work for them. And part of that just stems from there not really being one set traditional path to sort of this career, in a law firm there's a pretty traditional, you get out of law school, you go work for a law firm, you move up the ladder at the law firm. It's pretty set for you. I mean, there are obviously other routes you can go, but it's pretty set. Mediation, especially, but dispute resolution as a whole is very different from that. And it has a variety of different ways to go. The other factor is the vast majority of practitioners are solos solopreneurs, right? 85% of dispute resolution practitioners, even if they were part of a huge firm as a lawyer or whatever their prior practice might have been, often go out on their own and they don't know how to run a business. They have no idea. The first conversation I have is what does success look like? The second one is, can I see your business plan? How many of them do you think have a business plan?
1% maybe?
Uh,
Not many.
that's about right, right? Most of them, it's a blank stare.
Yeah,
Most of them, it's like, well, I have an idea of a plan in my
right.
head. Well, I wouldn't even know where to start. Or for the 1% who have them, they're 5 years into practice. They did one at in the first year and they've never looked at it since.
Yeah.
And so, I mentioned that I've built a bunch of businesses in the past few years as I started to move around. First, I started the podcasts and then the books and then the consulting business. And then COVID happened and I turned into a trainer and all these different things happened for me. But the main thing I had to learn was how to run a business. And although I had had my own law firm and I knew how to run a law firm, again, all very different. I
Mhm.
had to do marketing. I had to learn how to do, ads. I had to learn how to network on LinkedIn. I had to learn all these things on my own because there was no one out there really to help me do it.
Mhm.
And I noticed that a lot of my colleagues started to come to me asking for advice. And I just felt like the way to support the profession would be to give people avenues and information to become successful as practitioners. So
Yeah.
that's really my passion in all of this. It's one of the reasons why I took on the unpaid full-time job of being chair of the section of dispute resolution, right, for the ABA, because it gives me access to practitioners
Mhm.
so that I can hopefully share what I've learned. And that's really what I'm sharing is learn from my mistakes, learn what I had to learn on the fly. Let me make it as simple for you all as possible in the hopes that it will help you skip over some of the hurdles that I had.
Yeah. I know one thing that you're interested in is AI and the intersection of AI and dispute resolution. And specifically, you're also interested in the ethical components of AI. And taught ethics for a very long time, so I'm always interested in these questions. And of course, there are ethical considerations when it has to do with privacy and data collection. And then some, of course, with bias, like as these AI tools are built. But I was wondering if you could maybe talk about some hidden, maybe non-obvious ethical considerations when we are employing tools like AI to run businesses, but we're dealing with people, right, and their individuality and in their messiness. I'm very concerned about asking AI to do too much.
Yeah.
So what do you see there on that landscape?
So I think one of the biggest concerns around AI, and I want to say to people, they think because I'm a huge proponent of AI, ethically and appropriately used AI is changing our industry. And it is not, I'll just say this at the top, I don't think it's optional. I think if you want to succeed in this world going forward, you are going to have to learn how to adopt it ethically and professionally. But saying that, there is a huge concern, and I acknowledge it, that all those things that you said are absolutely correct. But face it, we've dealt with all of those concerns before, as recently as COVID, when we had to learn how to use Zoom to do our practice, right? Confidentiality, privacy, bias. I mean, all of those things play into that. And we learned how to deal with that. We came up with protocols, we came up with strategies, and we've dealt with it, and now we can't imagine doing what we do without this tool that we have right on our computer. Same thing with AI. We can come up with the strategies and protocols, but here's the biggest problem. Humans are lazy, and AI will do for us what we don't want to do. And where the laziness comes in is a few fold. It is one, we'll have it do things that it shouldn't be doing because it's easier and faster. Our laziness comes into this because we don't do what we absolutely ethically have to do, and that is review every single output that it gives us to make sure that it's ethically appropriate and professional. And there's a real concern that it will dumb us down, to use that, right? That it
Right.
will make us less creative because of the way, and I will say this, I think it's because of the way people are using it. So it directly goes to what I call the Google factor. We have been trained to be Google search thinkers. Ask it a question, it retrieves that information for us, and we're done.
Right.
And that's when we go to Chat GPT or an AI bot, we think it's the same thing. And we are completely missing the fact that it is actually not that at all. In fact, that's one of its worst uses. Thank you, ChatGPT lawyer. Um, its highest and best use is as a creative partner where we can create things with it through that conversation, through that thought process, through that work, that we do with it, where we take advantage of its pluses, but we monitor and input to work around those. And so what I find when I work with people, I do a lot of large law firm trainings. I go to conferences and teach, workshops for half day, full day. Number one mistake people are making is using it like it's Google. They put
Mhm.
in one input, they get a kind of half helpful answer, and they're like, well, I really don't see what the big deal is here, Susan. That wasn't that great. I could have come up with that on my own. So those are the real problems, I think. You asked ethically. I think ethically and it's the self-monitoring that it will take,
Mhm.
right? I don't know how you regulate laziness, the
Yeah.
inherent laziness of a human being, or
Mhm.
just, the number one excuse that law firm associates use, because it's still happening to this day. I mentioned the ChatGPT lawyer. That happened almost 2 years ago, right? Where he wrote the brief for the federal court and uh, cited cases that did not exist.
Right.
And I've said, thank you so much, Attorney Schwartz. You taught us all what not to do. You know
Right.
why? Because he thought it was super Google, and
Right.
it's not. It's still happening today every single day. Our colleagues did not learn the lesson of ChatGPT lawyer, and so it's continuing to happen. But the number one excuse is I was too busy. I used it as a shortcut because I needed to get it done, and the pressure was to get it done, and it didn't have time to review it.
Mhm.
Right. And maybe that's not lazy. Maybe that's something to say about our law firm culture, which is a
Mhm.
whole nother podcast. Right.
Right.
But it's a shortcut that's available. And I think people will take it for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And then you're going to get bad outcomes.
Yeah. I really love that answer because it's such a human answer, right? I mean, when I use ChatGPT, because I use it all the time, I use it as an assistant, and I think if I didn't know what I know, right? I mean, I've been a professional for a very long time. I know what I'm looking for. I know what my style of writing is. I know all of these things, and so I know a bad answer, a half answer. I know what I'm looking for, and I really do think it's like a little grad assistant, and so. I'm always know this, no, take this out. I want that more of it, right? But I know what I'm looking for, and I think about people who are being raised, who aren't as far along, right? That this problem with
Right.
students using it. How are you in a position to know whether or not it's a good answer, right? So, what does it mean to be professional? What does it mean to be literate in your career? And not offload things that ought not be offloaded, but then but be wise with your time. So I love that answer of laziness and the importance of not being dumbed down, creativity. I really do think if we don't use it, we lose it a lot with our brains, right? Our brains have this amazing capacity to grow and flourish if we're doing the right kinds of things. But it's just like atrophy in the body. If you don't use it, then you don't have what you had before, you have even less. Right. And
Right.
so, I think yeah, I don't have the cure for that, but it's good to think about.
Well, and I do, those are conversations we need to have. What we can't do, I don't believe, because regardless of the conversation, despite the challenges, it is here and it is here to stay and it is integrated into our lives. You're talking about the generation that's being raised today. The children of today are growing up in a world where AI existed in the context that it does today. They will face different challenges, yes, absolutely, with it, but they're also going to have more possibilities available to them because of this technology. We're in kind of this like straddling two worlds space. I just did a keynote last week with two other colleagues, and we were talking about the past I did the present, and then Colin Rule did the future family mediation. And we were very focused on integrating technology. It happens to be a passion of all of ours. And one of the big takeaways from that, the feedback they got, were people were appalled that we were advocating for the adoption of artificial intelligence. And what that's telling me is people are still not educated and understanding enough of the technology to understand that it's not really an option. It's a I need to get on this bus and figure out how to use it properly, but that does mean having conversations like you and I are having right now. Because I can tell you, just like you, I use these tools all day, every day, and I have never been more creative and productive in my professional career. One of the slides I show in my presentations these days is a slide of me and like all the things I've gotten done in the past year. I've got a new book coming. I've got my book that I had out last year. I've got 2 podcasts. I've got this. I've got that. Blah, 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 blah. And, I point out, look, I'm not showing you all of this to say, wow, Susan, how awesome are you? You're doing all this. I'm doing this to show you this is the most productive time of my life
Hmm.
because I use AI tools, and I believe I use them ethically and professionally.
Yeah. I think, when things get used improperly or our imagination is such that, oh, it's going to turn into this, that, or the other, right? That a lot of it is, as you said, is okay, well, use it for yourself. See what it's like. And it's so interesting. As soon as somebody uses it, even my husband's a bit of a Luddite, and like, oh, it can do this, it's like, yeah, but it's hard to imagine, especially if you are straddling these time periods of what is a new technology. Of course, for our children, it won't be new. The people who are being raised, it's just normal. But for us, it's new. And so the new and technology, very interesting, I think, about how to put that into your world. So AI is useful as a practitioner, no matter what you're practicing. But I want to kind of bring it back to conflict. And you are a professional in this field, you're a mediator, and you're a human person, so you deal with conflict. Can you tell us about maybe your own personal trajectory with dealing with conflict when it comes to colleagues? Maybe how you dealt with it when you were younger, and have you changed, grown, and developed, or have you always had a pretty good sense of how to deal with difficult situations at work?
Oh goodness, no. Uh, I wish I wish I had, but one of the things that made me a really good litigator is I can argue with anything, right? I can argue. I One of my favorite exercises in law school was where they would, get you ready in advocacy class, and you'd take, you're going to take the defense side or you're going to take the plaintiff side. And then when they do the switch and they're like, okay, go stand at the other desk and you're going to argue the other side now. I loved that. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So no, very much my nature was to argue my point, right? I will beat you into the ground with facts. And then when I got to go to law school, I'm like, wow, now I get the facts and the law. This is awesome. I've got two tools now. This is great. What was missing, right, was what I learned over time was the human factor is the third one. And that one didn't suit the facts and the law all that well. But so for me, being a mediator has been transformative in how I deal with conflict, how I deal with people. As a leader, what I've stepped through many roles in the. I've been a leader in my own companies, but then in the ABA for the past 6 years, I've sort of been climbing a ladder toward my current position as the chair of the section, and so that gives me right now as the chair, I have 13,000 members, a staff of 5, a essentially a board of directors, which is our executive committee, a council. I have all these people that I now work with, and guess what? They're all mediators and arbitrators and dispute resolution professionals. And guess what they do? They argue all the time. They're in conflict all the time. They have personality disputes all the time. And so a huge part of my job as the leader is to pull out my mediation skills and let people be heard
Mhm.
talk to people about finding solutions to the issues that they're facing, finding ways to get buy-in and to incentivize people to do what they say they're going to do when they don't do it, right? They're all of these things, dealing with difficult personalities, dealing with all of these things. I've been absolutely amazed at how important my mediation toolbox has been to me. The other thing I will say that transformed me was I had the wonderful experience of working with Woody Mostyn for 4 years when we had the Mostyn Guthrie Academy, which was a training academy for family law. We started it during COVID. And so for 4 years, I got to learn from Woody not just mediation techniques, but also the techniques of training, which I have to say, but prior to that, I had not been a trainer. I had not been an educator. You mentioned you taught ethics, so you know this. There's so much that translates from that skill set
Mm-hmm.
into the mediation skill set into the leadership skill set.
Mm-hmm.
So the person that I am today and how I deal with all of these things, the leader I am today, the business person I am today is vastly different than the advocate that I was, the litigator that I was, and certainly the 16-year-old who was, taking back the overcooked steak or whatever it was, dealing with an unhappy person back then. And I'm grateful for it.
Yeah.
I think that I use it. I mentioned I'm a stepmom. I have triplet stepchildren. I have used my mediation, although sometimes I have to whip out the litigator when they were younger. She came out every once in a while, but the mediator is far more effective.
Yeah. I love that you mention problems between peace professionals, people who are in the ADR space, because people are people.
Oh
That's
yeah.
what I think is so interesting. Like when I work with a company out of London. I do some mediation for them, and typically an organization wants to know, well, does this person, this mediator, have experience in this particular field? And I understand why that organization wants to know that. And I'll say, well, this is what I have experience in, but I think it doesn't matter. It's people, right? These are people problems. If you're going to a mediator, you've got people problems, and those are, you know, they're pretty basic. They're very difficult, they're particular, they're messy, they are very precious to people. They hold on to them. And so people are people, no matter if they are mediators. Mediators have problems with each other. And which I think goes to the sort of networking and having people where you can reach out to, because we all need help, no matter where you are in your development as a professional. You could be a CEO and still, if you can have people in your network that you can reach out to when you're having, issues in that, or whatever it might be, it's not just for the person starting out, right? We all need help. And this is a wonderful thing about being a part of a community, is that when you have an issue, and you will, because this is the nature of life, conflict is normal, and so we're going to have it. And it sometimes, when it arises and we don't expect it, can be that much more difficult. But being able to make those connections so that we can reach out to others when we are in it, and then we can be that support for others as well.
Yeah, it's a critical component to this, and I love that you say it's a people problem, because here that's one of those areas where I think people misunderstand what mediation is, right? So somebody asking, do you have experience in construction, litigation, roof failures, or whatever that might be? That's a legal mind talking about, can we beat you into submission with the law? And we want our mediator to help with that. That's not really what mediation is. I know it is for many people, but when you've actually been a part of, being able to be a part of the process, when you're helping the people resolve their people problems,
Mhm.
you see how different that can be from people being coerced into resolving something because, well, if you go to court on this, the judge is just going to do this or do that. And it's the same thing when I'm dealing with two members, say, of my section who are in conflict with each other. And, in the back of my head, I may be saying, these two people are dispute resolution professionals. Are you? What?
Right.
The reality is part of what they need is to be able to be heard,
Right.
It sounded trite when I first heard it in a training so many, many years ago, is everyone just wants that chance to be heard. But oh my God, is it true?
Yeah.
Everyone just wants that chance to be heard and understood, and and that opportunity to help them look at things in a different way
Yeah.
so that they can come to a resolution on it. And how much better life is when you finally are able to put that conflict behind you.
Yeah.
I used to tell divorce clients, and this was still when I was, negotiating settlements as their attorney and advocate. I would say, there's always a price tag on your peace of mind, but only you know the dollar sign for that. But the reality is they don't know the dollar sign for that because you don't know the value until you actually have the peace of mind.
Hmm.
I found that out in my own divorce, right? I'd been a divorce attorney for how long? About 15 years when I got divorced. And I had said that to people for so many years. And then I got there and you're like, yeah, but I'm going to get this much less, or I'm going to have to pay that much more. And you don't know it's worth it until the day you walk out and that conflict is over.
Yeah. There is something, so like we're on before we get to the conflict, right? There's something, there's kind of comfort in that narrative and in being right and being on the side of truth, right? Because I am right and this other person is in the wrong and they need to pay, whatever that means. And yet, and we are reticent to walk through it because why should I walk through this painful process with this person who's irrational and cares about themselves, who causes pain? And when we go through that process, that's why, again, it's about helping the person before they go through that process with the other person, that conflict coaching to really, this is about you. Who do you want to be? Who do you want to be on the other side? And the only way through is through. So what is that imagined better tomorrow? But people, a lot of times they just don't think about the future because they're so stuck in rectifying the past. And the past is never coming back. You're never going to get whatever that was. And usually what we want is for that to not have happened. But it
Yes.
has happened. Accepting reality and deciding, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do next? And sort of helping people loosen that hold. And so it's wonderful to be a part of helping people help themselves, right?
It really is. You
Yeah,
give them skills
yeah,
and tools that they can, just like I mentioned about myself, right? You give them tools and skills that they can take forward into that future. Because I love that. I say that quite often is, mediation is future focused, litigation is past focused.
yeah.
That's the main difference between the two of them. Um, and your future is where you're going. So why not go that way?
Right.
But those tools you get to actually, it's not just a one and done. You go to mediation and you walk out and you've resolved your conflict. You get much more than that, much
Right.
more than that. You've
Yeah.
learned how to resolve a conflict. And that's the real
Yeah.
gift.
And the confidence, right? How do you get confidence? You don't get it. You go through a process and then you see what it felt like and you see what the outcome is. And now you can imagine what I would do differently or what I would do the same. And then if we, it is a skill, right? So I was
Mhm.
conflict avoidant most of my life, a people pleaser. And how do you make a change? Well, it's slow going. I'm still in that process of that change, but it is through these steps of this a new habituation to dealing with conflict because a new vision, right? What do I want for my life? Authentic relationships. Well, that means it requires something of me in order to meet that goal, that vision I have for myself. And, helping people find whatever vision it is they have for themselves and developing those skills.
Yeah, it's the gift that keeps on giving from
Yeah.
being a mediator, because every time you do a mediation, I think you as the mediator also learn something new from what happened in that particular, it's never the same. No two people are the same. No conflict is exactly the same. And that's why, doing what we've always done, one of the things I love about mediation is the need to stay agile.
Hmm.
And because I think that's also what you just said, you're always changing, you're still moving forward, all of that. I think agility, and the ability to change, because we're so change resistant,
Hmm.
is actually where growth happens and how we move forward and change. And I would, I know people always say I wouldn't want to go back to, I'd go back to my like 30-year-old body, but I would never want to go back to my 30-year-old brain, right? Because
Right.
This one's way smarter, has learned a lot. The hard earned, all the wrinkles that have been earned through
Right.
learning, right?
Right. And I think if we have that mindset of forward progress, of agility, can help combat some of that laziness, right? What do I want for myself? Well, maybe in the short term, I want this project done, but in the long term, I would prefer to have an excellent reputation. So it needs to be done correctly. And I want to be able to create in the future. So I ought not offload all that responsibility to somebody else or to something else so that I can retain and continue to grow. Right. And so it is, I guess, having that real robust vision of who is it that I want to be? And then how can these tools, because they're tools, technology is always supposed to be a tool to help us get better. And that's my litmus test for any kind of technology. How does this enhance the flourishing life? How does this take away? All technology is some kind of trade. And so really squarely looking at how is it helping us in our fellow human? How is it taking away, or is it just even exchange? And then we make the decision as to whether or not this is something we ought to adopt.
I agree. That is, and we've done it repeatedly.
Hmm.
It's one of the things that we've done as humans is adopted technologies. The wheel was a technology. The
Right.
fire is a technology. The telephone was a technology. I remember because I had been an online mediator for years prior to the pandemic. And so before COVID shut us down, I had come up with my little training program to teach people how to mediate in a online setting. And I remember all the pats on the head I would get and oh, Susan, it's such a cute idea, but it's never going to work. We
Right.
can never, we just can't do what we do in this format and all. And now again, 5 years later, I don't think there are too many people out there who don't realize, who aren't using this technology in some way. And I think that, that right now people are all worked up over AI. It has some very clear challenges, but
Mhm.
every technology does. You just said it. So
Right.
it's a trade-offs. But it's not the last technology we're going to deal with.
No, that is so true.
The pipeline is wide open, folks. All the money, that's the other thing that COVID did for us is private equity is running around looking for technologies to put their money into to bring them to the table. So the pipeline's open. What we need to do is understand how we adopt them ethically and professionally,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
it's that
Having that.
conversation we need to have.
Absolutely. And I think being successful in general as a person is being open to the future. You're not done with learning. Learning, I mean, lifelong learning is not just a platitude, it's a necessity for being successful.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, if you decide to stop learning, to stop adopting technology, you have put yourself below the digital divide. You have outed yourself as somebody who is less than valuable. And so those first round of layoffs, they're going to be top of mind because you are the past. And that's a choice that we all make. And as organizations, we can come alongside people and we can help them. And not everybody is gifted in every way, but that agile mentality, I think, also can help them translate into thinking about solving conflicts. I say early, often swiftly and justly, so that they don't compound into these huge problems. So, Susan, my last question for you. As
Yes.
you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with baseline dignity and respect, but that to help people thrive and flourish?
Such a good question. And I wish I had the answer. It actually feels very challenged in the world that we are in today. I almost feel that we are stepping backwards in some of the ways that um, things that are happening in our world today with that. So, um, I think we need to, I think that it would be very helpful to the world if we could take all of these things that we've been talking about as positives in work and positives that we learn from being mediators and that others learn from our process, and if we could more widely disseminate those. So I'm always saying if you're a mediator, you're not just marketing your services and your particular services, you're marketing mediation constantly, right? Because people
Right.
don't know about it. But what we could do, I think, to benefit everyone is break it down even further than that and take the benefits of mediation and the tools we use to gather those benefits and proliferate those more widely.
Yeah.
because those skills are skills that should be at every table, that should be in every workforce, that should be in every industry. Our dispute resolution professionals, I think, can be the future of a better future.
I absolutely agree. Well, Susan, thank you so much for your time. What a fun conversation.
It really was. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Susan, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed. The work that you are doing to bring this to the foreground, alternative dispute resolution, so that people can be empowered to solve their own problems. Now, we all need help, and conflict professionals can come in and be that third party to help you along. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you like this episode, it would be very helpful if you like this on whatever podcast you're on and hit follow. If you haven't had a chance to check out my latest book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, it's 80 tips that helps us think about what we ought not do and do instead to bring about healthy work environments. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.